What is your definition of the digital era? Is the term analytical or rhetorical? Western history has been divided up in several ways. Most traditionally is the divide into ancient, medieval, modern, and contemporary modern times. Phillips explains a period, otherwise known as an era, as a span of time with a beginning and an end, during which phenomena can be identified, showing prevalent features, whereas Shepard defines eras as a time of development of an evolutionary system whereby knowledge turnover is very high and also increasingly out of control of humans. An era can also be identified using themes, which is a broader approach to identifying phenomena. This is due to each period being characterized by a certain way of thinking. This is supported by Drucker, who explains an era as being characterized by intense socio-economic transformation. This can be something on a similar scale to the Industrial Revolution. The identification of eras by themes could include revolutions from the first in 1784, with railroads and steam power, to the third in 1969, including electronics and computers, which is where the concept of a digital era appears. However, the division of history in any way is highly subjective, and Jordanova believes that lessons from history should be challenged due to their reliance upon mischievous assumptions about the nature of historical knowledge and the extrapolations that can be made from it. Phillips also considered the issues surrounding periodization, which include the dependence of significant dates or events that may be determined to change, that the purpose of periodization is making sense of time spans by identifying unities of some kind, and that the order of history is largely subjective. Definitions of digital era are broad and span several start dates which are dependent upon the source of the information. One definition comes from Starkey, who defines the digital age as a time of innovations and interventions which act as catalysts for change within complex systems on the macro level. Starkey also states that a significant innovation during the digital era was the World Wide Web. This may conclude that the beginning of the digital era could be described as a time where the development of digital technologies and supporting infrastructure began. However, this period is widely disputed with what defines digital technology. Another way in which to define the digital era is using start and end dates, as done by Brown, who defines part of the digital era through the waves of computer use. These begin in 1975 with the instruction wave, problem-solving wave in 1980, mind tool wave in 1985, and the media wave in 1995. Peters, on the other hand, believes the second half of the 20th century saw the explosion of the computing industry, which is where the digital era lies. Not only is defining the era subject to opinion, but first a definition of digital must be agreed upon. Digital can be something as simple as information contained and provided via technology. However, it can be described as an electronic technology that generates, stores, and processes data in terms of two states, positive and negative. A digital device is simply a device or component that responds to or produces a discrete function based on a change in state known as discrete data. This is the opposite of an analog device, which is a device in which continuously varying data is processed as a continuous stream of varying information, whereby it is theoretically possible for data to lie anywhere upon an imaginary line segment. This is known as continuous data. All these definitions of both eras and the term digital are correct in their own right. However, due to not everyone having access to digital content, it is difficult to accurately analyse the situation of a digital era, and because of this, there is no agreed start date of when the digital era began or what it truly means. Through research into eras and the definition of digital era, I believe the term digital era is best defined as a period which is encompassed by a world filled with digital devices for everyday use. These digital devices work on discrete data concept, whereby they do one function or another dependent on a change in state. Although the dates are ambiguous for when the era began, it is clear that the world around us is now moving into an artificial intelligence way of life, coinciding with a continuous data type of digital device. With this inclusive definition of a digital era in mind, it is something that is difficult to analyse or provide logical reasoning for, and although it can be broken down into parts and structured, these can be different dependent on the personal views and opinions of the individual defining them. Therefore, there is no obvious truth or accuracy to the term, meaning it is unable to be an analytical term. On the other hand, a term that is rhetorical is used to make an effect or a statement rather than to elicit information. Thus, the digital era can be seen as a rhetorical term due to the lack of meaningful context and sincerity of the definition. This is due to the ambiguous start date, which cannot be agreed, the lack of inclusion into the digital era, and the idea of world history being only the history of Western progress.